Okay, this is a series Called to Persevere. We're looking at post-exilic prophets. I have been enjoying saying that to people. Oh, I'm teaching on post-exilic prophets.
It does show you.
And, I generally get this double take. It's like, right, okay. And from some people who know me, I get this, that figures. So.
Of course you
So we didn't meet last week, but prior to that, we looked at the chronology of the exile and the reasons for the return, the political reasons for the return that support God's reasons for the return. And we looked at the book of Haggai. And Haggai was one of the people who came back in the first return. There will be multiple ones. Uh, Spoiler, there will be multiple returns. But Haggai came back along with Joshua and Zerubbabel in the first return. Somewhere between 40 and 50,000 Jews came back at that time. And they built the altar and got their Levitical observances going. And they laid the foundation for the temple. And then life got in the way. They got busy and preoccupied and distracted, and nothing happened on the temple for maybe like 16 years, long time. And then the word of God came to Haggai, and he said, build my temple. And I enjoyed looking at Haggai because I'm a person who gets distracted, and sometimes I don't finish what I start out to do. And Haggai reminded me that there are priorities, and uh, and I can't just assume that God's work will get done by somebody else, or that there's no rush. I need to be about the work that He has called me to do. So Haggai was good. It was interesting to me that, when you look back over this sweep of time, the people of God strayed from God, which we know is a theme in the Old Testament. And I've talked to you about my meditations on spiritual entropy, where if you're not actively moving closer to God, you're drifting away, which that's horrifyingly true. But the people strayed, and so God sent people to call them back. People like Amos. We talked a lot about Amos last year, and Hosea and Isaiah. Come back to me. Return to me. I am not going to leave you. You should not leave me, God says to the people. And they don't repent. So then we know the Assyrians conquered the north and carried them away, and the Babylonians conquered the south and carried them away. And still, God was sending people to call His people. There's Jeremiah in Jerusalem at the time. As the news people say, he was boots on the ground, right? He was there when it was happening. And through him, God was calling them, return to me, return to me. This punishment doesn't mean I don't love you. This means I care for you. You must return to me. And Ezekiel, who was in Babylon, and the word of the Lord came to him. And, he even talked about a valley of dry bones. All the people said, well, we're here in Babylon. Our spiritual life, our relationship with God is dried up and dead. We don't have a temple. We don't have anything. And Ezekiel says, look at this. God can raise up bleached bones in a valley and make an army. And then, they do finally come back, and, they're not getting the job done, and God speaks again. God is so faithful to keep calling us, to keep returning to us, to keep reaching out to us. And so he speaks to Haggai, and Haggai says, God still loves you, God is still with you, but you've got to focus on God. You've got to return to him. You've got to do your part of the relationship. So that's what we looked at in Haggai. And now we're going to look at Zechariah. Zechariah is a whole nother kettle of fish. You know, Haggai was plain spoken. You need to build the temple. It's very straightforward. Get this done. Do this thing. Zechariah is different. Uh, Haggai was a prophet. Maybe he was older. We talked about some of the people who came back might have been old enough to remember what the temple looked like, what Jerusalem looked like. Most of the scholars think that Haggai was an older man when he came back. And he does his 4 messages. Remember, we've got those specific dates in 520 from August to December when he does his 4 messages. And then we don't ever hear about him again. That's he shot his wad. uh, Muzzle loader language. Sorry. Uh, Zechariah is a completely different person. He's a prophet, but he's also of the priestly family. So, like Jeremiah, like Ezekiel, he is a prophet priest. And so his viewpoint is slightly different. It's affected by that. Also, his name, Zechariah, some say that might translate the Lord remembers, and others say it could be translated the one who Jehovah remembers, which is an interesting take on it. He was probably born in Babylon, returned with that first group in 538. His grandfather is listed in the lists of people who came back. I don't know how you say his name. It's Iddo. Iddo. Hey, Iddo. Or Ido, or I don't know, but yeah, it's his grandfather. And the interesting thing is Zacharias succeeds his grandfather as priest, which means the son didn't play into the history. So the question I have is, the scholars say, well, he probably died young. But I wonder, did he not come back? Did he decide to stay? Because we know, probably 80,000 people stayed. So I wonder if the middle generation there just didn't return. Or maybe, the journey was hard. Maybe he died on the return, or when they got back, it was tough going. So we don't know anything about the middle generation. It goes from Iddo to Zechariah. And so Zechariah was probably a youngish guy, right? So he's got that different viewpoint as well, not just a priestly viewpoint, but a younger man who didn't see all of this before the destruction. Zechariah is going to have a long period of prophecy. He starts in 520 when Haggai is prophesying, when Darius is king. Remember Darius, or Darius, as some of the historians call him. But Zechariah is going to have a long period of prophecy. And well, let's just talk about his writings here. You can take the book of Zechariah, the writings of Zechariah, and divide them into three pieces. All right. The first piece is just a little introductory piece in 520, at the same time that Haggai is telling the people, you got to build the temple. Zechariah has his first message from God then. And then he has a series of visions and other messages from God that happen after the people start building. We'll look at those. And then the third part of his message happens later when he's an older man. And it sounds different. And the scholars, get all excited. Maybe somebody else wrote this. But I don't know about you, but if, I wrote down things that I thought when I was in my 20s, things I wrote 35 years later would probably look and sound a little bit different. So I'm okay with him sounding different in the second half. But there's those three pieces. And we're going to look at the first one today and then start on the second one. Zechariah's prophecies are more colorful. So hold on to your hats. When Catherine was 4, we were riding on a bumpy road, and I turned around and looked at her in the back seat, and she says, "Hold on to your hips." So anyway, it's got nothing to do with anything, except I said, "Hold on to your hat." So, okay. Zechariah is also known for apocalyptic literature. What, pray tell me, is apocalyptic literature? Anybody have a quick definition or a suggestion of what might be called apocalyptic literature? Jen?
It seems like you're baiting me because it's too easy, but literature that's about the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. It's about end times. It typically is very symbolic. It usually, one of the themes is God is in control. It's intended to be encouraging during difficult times to God's people. The most famous apocalyptic passages in the Bible are Daniel 7 through 12, Zechariah, that we're going to be looking at, and Revelation. Exactly. So we're going to find some interesting imagery in Zechariah. I did run across this apocalyptic. That is a Greek word, and it means to pull the lid off of something. Apocalyptic. So that makes sense to us because it's a revealing. It's often called revelatory in its nature. So we've got all this apocalyptic language we're going to look at. Yeah. Open, visible, revealed, not mysterious anymore. Still confusing. Yeah. Well, I think our Western minds don't do symbolic literature very well, because we have this tendency to go, oh, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And well, that could be, and maybe this. And we get focused in on the details and we miss the message, I think, sometimes in apocalyptic literature. It is difficult to outline it because we don't think in those terms. That's not our norm. One interesting thing I ran across is there was we could do a whole series of Zechariah quoted in the New Testament, because Zechariah is either directly quoted or his themes are referred to often in the New Testament, more often than even Isaiah, which that blew my mind. One of the scholars said that if you look at all the passages that harken back to Zechariah, there are 54 passages in Zechariah that are echoed in 67 places in the New Testament, mostly in Revelation, which doesn't surprise us. But Zechariah is very often quoted and was very well known, was it's like on the tip of the tongue for the first century people, which I didn't, I've never studied these prophets this deeply, and that surprised me. Well, lots of reasons why I should be studying this. But anyway, Zechariah opens same time as Haggai, 520 BC, during the reign of Darius the Great, Persian king. And Persia is repopulating the land. It's the largest empire up to this time in history. And the Persians realize that in order to hold this land, they've got to have people in the land. So they start sending the people back. And so it's not just the Jews that are sent back to rebuild their town and rebuild their temple. Darius is sending lots of people back, particularly to the edges of the empire, to hold on to it. And Darius is also, they call these buffer states, but Darius is also getting ready to attack Egypt, because at this point, Egypt is still outside the Persian Empire. He's going to win. He's going to get it. But at this point, Egypt is still a separate empire. And so he is raising funds for his campaign, because, during ancient times, you take 100,000, people. I mean, armies are huge, and all the elephants and everything else, it's a big darn deal when you go fight a battle. And so he needs to raise money. So he's upped the taxes on all of the people in the kingdom, in the empire. And that's falling pretty hard on the people in Jerusalem. And their neighbors don't like them being there. Their neighbors are complaining. So let's look at Zechariah. Let's see. One other thing. I'm doing a little more review this time since we didn't meet last week, because I don't know about you, but I slept. So, forget. The last time we met, we talked about the people's expectations. We talked about what they would anticipate happening when they got back. When they come back and the place is in rubble, and they know that God promised 70 years, and then you'll come back and you'll rebuild, and you will be mine and I will be yours. And they know that. And so they come back, and they probably had, as many expectations as there were people in the group, right? Probably everybody had a little different idea about what was going to happen. But, among those, probably there was somebody who thought, well, our God is going to be very visible in this. Our God is going to, he, parted the Red Sea. He made the walls of Jericho fall down. There's liable to be something really glorious in Jerusalem. Can't wait to see what's going to happen. And maybe, maybe somebody else is thinking, well, God promised that we'd come back, and so he's going to make this easy for us. It's just going to roll right along. It's going to just happen. It's going to be easy peasy. Probably some others were thinking, well, it'll probably be a little bit of work, but, there's 50,000 of us, and, we'll just get right to it, and it'll just happen before we know it. It'll seem like it just happened in a snap. I kind of think there were a minority of people who were thinking this is going to be hard. But this is a desolate place with enemies all around and no wall. And easy to see how they would get discouraged pretty quickly. And then maybe they start thinking, maybe God isn't with us after all. Maybe God can't really be trusted. We're out here, we kind of got tricked into this, and now we're stuck, and He's abandoned us, and things aren't happening. And exactly what happened when they were roaming the wilderness. True. That's right. True over and over and over again. Even though they'd seen the miracles, even though they'd seen the power, even though they'd seen promises kept, even though, well, this is a different time. That was then, this is now. And things are rotten. Things are difficult. And Satan plays into this. The age old lie. Is that really what he said? Just like us. So just like us. What have you done for me today, God? It's hard to persevere if you're not 100% sure God's going to show up. It's really hard to persevere when things are really, really hard. When the numbers are few, when the rubble is a mess, when the stones are heavy, it's hard. So they start wondering, are we on the right path? Is He here with us? Has He given up on us? And true to God's character, He speaks to them. Spoke to them through Haggai, speaks to them through Zechariah. And He tells them, I'm with you. I keep my promises. I'm still here. Round up the sheep.
Basically, it was given to them
when they went to the promised land.
Exactly. Now, when you look at the, if you want to call them that, that's what the book calls them, the curses that God gave in direct response to their abandonment of their faith in Him and their trust in Him.
Mm-hmm.
They lost that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, apparently, I really do believe a lot of them thought, He'll just give it back to us again. It'll be there when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, He did promise He'd send us back in 70 years, and here we go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult for us, just like it was for them. You can be at one place with God because of God and what He's done. And very quickly, you can be in a totally different place, and God may not be very close by.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we still expect those blessings. We still expect that relationship. We still expect the benefits. There's no guarantee that what we had, we can restore without effort.
True. And our expectations very rarely line up with what God has in mind. We're always thinking too small. We're always thinking right now, immediately. We're always thinking it'll make me comfortable. Yes, Carrie.
Another part that perspective, I think maybe it's touched on, is that I trust God with all my heart, my soul, my mind, but it may not be God's timing.
Mhm.
And that may just be, is this what he means? Is this, am I ready? Am I in the right place to receive this blessing? You know, it's on us. It's not on him. I got to look at, over here, because God's got this. He knows the past, the present, and the future. I don't. Anyway.
Yeah. Timing is a big darn deal. And these people live in an already and not yet time, very much the way we do, because the 70 years, the return is the already. And now they're having to wait on the not yet part of it. So Zacharias speaks up probably as a young man, having heard from the Lord at the same time that Haggai is talking. So if you look at the beginning of Zechariah, you see it's dated like Haggai is. I love these dates. In the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah and son of Edu. The Lord was very angry with your ancestors. Therefore, tell the people, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Return to me, declares the Lord Almighty, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. Do not be like your ancestors, to whom the earlier prophets proclaimed, this is what the Lord Almighty says, turn from your evil ways and your evil practices. But they would not listen or pay attention to me, declares the Lord. Where are your ancestors now? And the prophets, do they live forever? But did not my words and my decrees, which I commanded my servants, the prophets, overtake your ancestors, outlive your ancestors? Then they repented and said, the Lord Almighty has done to us what our ways and practices deserve, just as he determined to do. You're doing the same thing that we've done over and over and over again. Okay? Same darn thing. So, what do you think God wants them to learn from this review of history?
I really do believe that God is trying to teach them that you reap what you sow, and the weeds are going to come too. I think it's pretty straightforward that he's trying to reset their expectations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In case you've forgotten, we've done all this before. You know, you can look at your own history and you know what I'm going to say to you. And I love the part about, the ancestors pass away, the prophets pass away, but God's words last forever. That's beautiful. Okay, so that happens at the same time as Haggai's messages. So then about 5 months pass. Haggai's done. They're building the temple. And God comes to Zechariah in the night and gives him 8 night visions. 8. Yes, an odd number. An even number, but an unusual number. Yeah. Okay, so let's start looking at these 8 visions. Now, again, I've told you my bias. I think we pick them apart and try to figure out every little detail and miss the overall message. So think with me about the big message on these things. Okay, here's the first one. On the 24th day of the 11th month, the month of Shabbat, In the second year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, son of Berechiah, son of Iddo. During the night I had a vision, and there before me was a man mounted on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in a ravine. Behind him were red, brown, and white horses. I asked, "What are these, my Lord?" The angel who was talking to me answered, "I will show you what they are." So apparently there's kind of a narrator standing beside Zechariah. Then the man standing among the myrtle trees explained, "They are the ones the Lord has sent to go throughout the earth." And they reported to the angel of the Lord who was standing among the myrtle trees, "We have gone throughout the earth and found the whole world at rest and in peace." Then the angel of the Lord said, "Lord Almighty, how long will you withhold mercy from Jerusalem and from the towns of Judah, which you have been angry with these 70 years? So the Lord spoke kind and comforting words to the angel who talked to me. Then the angel who was speaking to me said, "Proclaim this word. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I'm very jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, and I am very angry with the nations that feel secure. I was only a little angry, but they went too far with the punishment. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. I will return to Jerusalem with mercy, and there my house will be rebuilt. And the measuring line will be stretched out over Jerusalem, declares the Lord Almighty. Proclaim further. This is what the Lord Almighty says. My towns will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion and choose Jerusalem." Okay. There are horsemen. And apparently the horsemen have power, and they're charged with going all over the earth, very much like what we see in Revelation. And there's the angel of the Lord who is in charge of them. They report to him. And, you know, we've talked about the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, and, you know, most scholars believe that the angel of the Lord, as shown in this particular passage and others, is the pre-incarnate Son. So there's a message. It's a reaffirmation of God's love. I haven't forgotten you. I am going to take care of you. And if the angel of the Lord is indeed who we call Jesus, he's acting as an intercessor. He's asking God, you know, how long are you going to take care of us? Okay, hold that thought. That's the first one. Here's the next one. Then I looked up, and there before me were 4 horns. Horns are usually military power and strength. I asked the angel who was speaking to me, his narrator, "What are these?" And he answered me, "These are the horns that scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem." Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen, and I asked, "What are these coming to do?" He answered, "These are the horns that scattered Judah so that no one could raise their head, but the craftsmen have come to terrify them and throw down these horns of the nations who lifted up their horns against the land of Judah to scatter its people." Okay. The nations are not going to triumph. You know, God's got your back. That's the Karen Strong version. Okay, look at the third one. Then I looked up, and there before me was a man with a measuring line in his hand. We've seen measuring lines before, right? Yeah. And I asked, "Where are you going?" He answered me, "To measure Jerusalem, to find out how wide and long it is." While the angel who was speaking to me was leaving, another angel came to meet him and said to him, "Run, tell that young man, Jerusalem will be a city without walls, because the great number of people and animals in it. And I myself will be a wall of fire around it, declares the Lord, and I will be its glory within." Don't bother measuring it. It's too big to measure. It's going to be glorious. Now, clearly, we're not talking about Jerusalem. We're talking about Jerusalem, right? Too big to measure. Amazing. And I love that line in verse 5. I myself will be a wall of fire around it, declares the Lord, and I will be its glory within. There's a bright future ahead for us. Come, come, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, for I have scattered you to the four winds of heaven, declares the Lord. Come, Zion, escape, you who live in daughter Babylon. For this is what the Lord Almighty says. After the glorious one has sent me against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye, I will surely raise my hand against them so that their slaves will plunder them. Then you will know the Lord Almighty has sent me. Shout and be glad, daughter of Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. The Lord will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. Be still before the Lord, all mankind, because he has roused himself from his holy dwelling. If God's been asleep at the wheel, he's awake now. Things are going to happen. This is going to be glorious. God will return and take care of his people. All the bad stuff that's happened, God will avenge. And not just for the Jews. Look at this. For I am coming and I will live among you, declares the Lord. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. Now, the Jews have always been very jealous of that my people title, and rightfully so. And now we're finding out that God's people is going to be a broader group of people. Good news for you and me. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. This is a beautiful picture of what is to come. All right. We just did the first 3. Next week, we'll have to cover more ground. I do love the fact that God is attentive to his people and encouraging. I mean, he doesn't have to explain himself to us. He doesn't have to deal with our feelings, but he loves us, and he does. And he's good about trying to give us a glimpse of what he's got in mind. Next week, visions 4 and 5 are key. They're really important. So I don't want to split them up. I don't want to do one this week and one next week. There are scholars who say that the 8 visions have that chiastic form, and visions 4 and 5 are the ones in the middle, the most important ones. So we'll look at those next week. And we'll talk a little more about the overall message of the visions to Zechariah and what these mean for the people in Jerusalem. So, anybody want to make a closing comment? Zechariah is really cool. There's lots of good stuff in here, and lots more to come. Okay, I'll see you next week.